Anaya had always known that her life was shaped more by necessity than choice. Growing up in a small, crowded town, her family's days were dictated by the relentless struggle to make ends meet. Her father's hands were calloused from years of labor, her mother's shoulders perpetually bowed from worry, and Anaya herself carried the weight of unspoken responsibilities, learning early that her opinions held little sway in her household. Despite her gentle nature and bright mind, she had long understood that happiness was a luxury her family could scarcely afford. Every day was a negotiation with fate, and every decision made for her felt like a reminder that freedom was something she might never taste. When the arrangement was made for her marriage to Rafiq, a farmer living in a distant village, Anaya's stomach turned in knots. At 19, she was still inexperienced in the ways of the world, still dreaming in secret of possibilities she might never reach. She had heard of Rafiq only in passing, whispers that painted him as a solitary man, someone who rarely ventured into the village, a figure who seemed to exist on the edges of life rather than within it. The thought of leaving the only home she had ever known for a place so remote, with a man she barely knew, filled her with a fear that felt almost tangible, like a heavy cloak suffocating her spirit. Her mother's words, delivered with gentle insistence, offered no comfort. "It is for your own good," she said. "He will provide stability. You will learn to be happy." But Anaya could not imagine a happiness born from obligation, and every mile toward the village seemed to widen the gap between hope and reality. The journey itself was long and exhausting, traveling over dusty roads that seemed endless under the relentless sun. Anaya clutched her bag tightly, every bump and sway of the carriage amplifying her anxiety. She thought of the life she was leaving behind, the noisy streets, the small market stalls, the friends she would never see again, and a sharp pang of loneliness gripped her heart. And yet there was also a flicker of curiosity, an almost guilty anticipation of the unknown. What kind of man was Rafiq? Would he be cruel, as some villagers hinted, or simply distant, lost in the rhythm of his solitary life? The uncertainty was terrifying, yet it sparked a cautious hope that perhaps, somewhere beneath the hard exterior, there might be a man capable of kindness. When she finally arrived at the farmhouse, her heart pounded in her chest. The building was modest, made of sun-bleached wood, surrounded by fields of wheat that swayed gently in the wind. It was quiet, almost painfully so, and for a moment Anaya felt as if she had stepped into a different world entirely. Rafiq stood at the doorway, his figure silhouetted against the late afternoon light. He was taller than she had imagined, broad-shouldered and weathered by the sun. But his face was not the harsh mask she had anticipated. Instead, there was a softness in his eyes, a quiet awareness that seemed to measure her presence with care rather than entitlement. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and gestured toward the house. There was no grand welcome, no ceremony, only a simple acknowledgement that this was the beginning of something neither of them fully understood. The first days were a careful dance of observation and learning. Anaya watched as Rafiq moved with precision through the routines of the farm, tending to the animals with gentle authority, checking the irrigation channels, repairing fences with patient, deliberate movements. She followed his lead, learning how to lift and carry, how to feed and clean, how to anticipate the needs of the land and its creatures. Every task felt unfamiliar and exhausting, yet there was a rhythm to it that began to settle her nerves. Rafiq spoke rarely, but when he did, his words were simple and direct, guiding without commanding, correcting without harshness. Anaya found herself listening closely, absorbing his instructions, noting the small kindnesses, the way he would pause to ensure she was not struggling, the way he handed her water without a word, as if he understood her fatigue without needing to be told. Evenings were quieter still. Anaya would sit by the hearth, her hands raw from labor, watching the shadows play across the walls. Rafiq, after his work was done, would join her occasionally, bringing small offerings, a piece of bread, a mug of tea, and speak softly about the routines of the land, the history of the village, the memories of his youth. He spoke of losses with a light touch, never dwelling, but enough to hint at the depth of his loneliness. Anaya began to see that his solitude was not a symptom of cruelty, as she had feared, but a wound, carefully guarded and hidden from the world. And in his quiet way, he offered her an invitation, not to love, not yet, but to trust. Despite these moments of calm, anxiety still crept in, fueled by the judgmental eyes of the villagers. They whispered about her, questioning why a young woman like her would accept a life so removed from the town, so bound to a man who barely spoke. Their words, though distant, carried weight, and Anaya felt the sting of isolation acutely. At night, she would lie awake, torn between resentment at her parents' decision and a growing curiosity about Rafik himself. She wondered if he noticed her fears, if he understood the conflict that churned within her, and whether she would ever truly belong in this place. And yet, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the walls around her heart began to shift. She observed the small ways in which Rafik demonstrated care, not grand gestures, but acts so simple they could be easily overlooked, leaving a warm towel by the washing basin, sharing a story under the fading light of dusk, repairing a worn shoe without being asked. Each act chipped away at her assumptions, replacing fear with a cautious hope. She began to realize that marriage, even one arranged without her input, could hold moments of tenderness, that human connection could exist even in circumstances dictated by necessity. As the days turned into weeks, Anaya started to feel a tentative sense of agency. She learned to navigate the fields with confidence, to anticipate the rhythms of farm life, and to speak up when necessary, her voice gaining strength and clarity. Rafik, in turn, began to respond to her growing competence, offering guidance that was less instruction and more collaboration. There was a subtle shift in their dynamic, a recognition that each of them had value, that each could contribute not merely to the survival of the farm, but to the slow building of understanding between them. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the wheat fields in shades of gold, Rafik handed her a glass of water and smiled briefly, a gesture so understated it might have been missed by anyone else. But for Anaya it was profound, a moment that conveyed acknowledgement, respect, and perhaps the first stirrings of genuine connection. She realized then that her life in this remote village, which she had approached with dread, was slowly revealing a depth of human experience she had never imagined, the quiet power of patience, the strength found in mutual respect, and the unexpected beauty of a bond forged not by passion, but by trust. By the end of her first month, Anaya could no longer see Rafik as merely a lonely farmer or a stranger imposed upon her life. She saw him as a man shaped by hardship and heartache, capable of gentleness and deserving of trust. In her own way, she began to embrace the rhythms of this new life, discovering that fear could coexist with hope, and that even in the most constrained circumstances, there was room for growth, understanding, and perhaps eventually love. Months passed, and the rhythm of life on the farm became almost second nature to Anaya. The first hesitations and fears she carried into this new life had softened, replaced by a growing confidence in her own abilities and a deeper understanding of the land that had once intimidated her. Each day presented a new challenge, repairing fences after storms, tending to sick animals, navigating the relentless demands of planting and harvest. But with each task, she discovered resilience she had never known she possessed. And through it all, Rafik remained a steady presence, offering guidance without pressure, support without intrusion. At first, their interactions were simple and functional. Instructions about the irrigation channels, reminders to care for the livestock, observations about the changing weather. Yet gradually, their exchanges became more nuanced, infused with subtle humor, shared observations, and the quiet acknowledgement of each other's effort. Anaya began to see Rafik not merely as a caretaker of the land, but as a man who had learned to survive through diligence and patience. His solitude was no longer a shadow over her life, but a space in which she could witness the depth of his character, his capacity for thoughtfulness and restraint, and the rare vulnerability he allowed only in her presence. The villagers, who had once whispered about the young bride in hushed, judgmental tones, began to notice the transformation as well. They saw Rafiq smile more often, a rare curve of his lips that spoke volumes to those who had only known his stern exterior. They saw Anaya moving with purpose through the fields, her hands skilled and her gaze confident, and they whispered again, not in suspicion this time, but in awe. The woman who had arrived timid and uncertain was now an integral part of the farm, a presence that seemed to strengthen rather than diminish the man she had married.